Mheshimiwa Kissinger. And just to get to hear a bit about your life and career, and highlight if there are any awards that you have received in the course of your journey, and finally mention why you think you're the man for Chebukati's position.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, members of the panel. My name is Francis Kissinger Kakai, and I must take this opportunity to thank all of you for having me here and for giving me a chance to appear before you, and I don't take this for granted. As I said, my name is Francis Kakai Kissinger. I'm a lawyer by profession. I hold a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Nairobi. I hold a postgraduate diploma in international trade law from the University of Turin in Italy. And finally, I hold a master's degree specializing in human rights, governance, and aspects of elections. In terms of award, I was awarded a scholarship by the International Labour Organization to go and study the postgraduate diploma in trade law from the University of Turin. Later on, sometimes in 2006, I was awarded another scholarship again to go and study human rights, governance, and aspects of elections at a master's level in the United States of America. In terms of my experience, Chair, and what makes me think I'm qualified for this position, allow me to only focus on the aspects of my CV that is relevant to the position that I've applied for. But I must also mention that I've had an advantage or a privilege of being a lecturer, and I taught at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and I also taught at the Kenya School of Law. So let me focus now, Chair, on the relevant experience. I first got exposed to election in 1997. As a very young student then, I was just about to complete my university, and the late chairman of the ECK, the defunct ECK, the late Honorable Justice Zacchaeus Chesoni, gave me an opportunity to work in the 1997 general election. At that time, the ECK, the defunct now, was dealing with the issues of civic and voter education. But if you fast forward now, civic education is no longer a domain of the current IEBC. So Zacchaeus Chesoni then, may his soul rest in peace, thought I will be in charge of training of trainers, in the sense that I'll train so many clerical officers who will then be deployed outside to go and man the general election. After completing that task on election in 1997, so I was actively involved in 1997, after 6 months, the late Chesoni gave me another contract again to be in charge of our warehouse and supervising people in that warehouse where now the election materials, the ballot boxes and ballot papers, you remember those days we were using the black ones, were now being brought back to the headquarters for storage and for purposes of preparation of election petition. Those are what we call sensitive electoral materials. That was the end of my assignment with the Electoral Commission of Kenya. And sometimes in 2007, in 2006, I left Kenya to go and undergo my master's degree in the US. Came back in 2007. That was an election year as well. On 1st of December in 2007, I was recruited, fresh from the US, I was recruited by ELOG. ELOG gave me an opportunity to be the chief executive officer. And at this point, I must disclose that Dr. Koki Muli, at the time, was the centerpiece behind ELOG when she was working with IED. So they gave me a job as a CEO, and ELOG was then coordinating elections, observation, and monitoring within Kenya. And it didn't materialize because hot on the heels, UNDP was also seeking for election observation and experts in election to assist in civic and voter training. So my good friend, Dr. Karuti Kanyinga, had acquired a very huge consultancy with the UNDP. And Karuti Kanyinga reached out to me and said I should join the team to go around the country carrying out civic and voter education. So I joined the team, and I was allocated two provinces. At the time, we used to call them provinces. I was allocated two provinces, the Rift Valley and Western. My responsibility was to go through and engage with all stakeholders, known and unknown, in election matters. So the churches, the civil society, the CBOs, politicians, candidates, and so forth, to train them on civic and voter education. That engagement was very successful, and we went into election. After my engagement with UNDP, I then joined and was recruited by the German Technical Corporation. German Technical Corporation is a German government-based organization that supports governments and civil society in this country. So I was hired as a senior governance advisor, and I worked there supporting, that time, two main institutions as a governance advisor. I was supporting the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on matters surrounding combating corruption, and I was supporting the Ministry of Justice. We had a program at the time called GJLOS. So I was at the center of it. After my tenure as a senior governance advisor from GIZ, I joined government, and at that time, the institutions, the new constitution was in place, and many institutions were looking for means and ways of enhancing the operation of those institutions. So I joined the judiciary. I joined the judiciary as a deputy chief registrar of that institution. That was around 2011. And at the same time, while at the judiciary, the management of the judiciary then thought it's wise to appoint me as a director of a new program that I was tasked to begin. And that program was called the Judiciary Performance Project. So my responsibility then in the judiciary was to focus more on the day-to-day operation and management of the institution, because as a deputy chief registrar, you're also basically in the administration. And I was tasked with fundraising for funds from the World Bank, and I designed at that time, with the help of other colleagues there, the JP project, and we were able to raise 120 million US dollars. Those were the monies that eventually found themselves in the judiciary under that project with the World Bank, and it was meant for expansion of courts. It was meant for having IT infrastructure in the courts. It was meant for buying equipments in the courts to ensure that we have at least 47 high courts, at least a high court in each county. After my tenure at the judiciary, I went back to a setting mode. And I remembered that I loved election. And my mind took me back to election. And the then chairman of the African Union, Her Excellency Dr. Dlamini Zuma, was having a program of election observation and recruited me as a coordinator of elections with a specific allocation of countries within Africa. Because in a year you will have one election or two elections running in a country, and my work was basically to go around those countries to monitor and observe elections in those countries. I took the job seriously, and that job changed my perspective on election, because I was able, as I speak now, to do about 8 countries in Africa, 8 countries in Africa on elections. Every year, I'll do an election. Some countries I'll go there twice. And my responsibility when you are in that institution or when you are in that position as a coordinator of election, you are working with the EMB of that country. You are auditing the entire electoral process in that country. At your fingertips, you have what we call the electoral cycle, and you are auditing to know whether that country has complied with the international standards, whether that country has complied with the regional standards, and whether that country has complied with the domestic standards, and whether that election is good or not. In between that period, so a number of countries I did under the African Union, but in between that period, the East African community developed a similar model. And then in 2016, I was privileged to be then hired as a coordinator, again, in charge of long-term observers, short-term observers, staying in that country for almost 2 or 3 months, and that's normally the model that operates. And I was hired by the East African community to manage the general election of the Republic of Uganda in the 2016 general election in Uganda. That's under the East African community, and I can see the flag of EAC there. In 2021 election, just after the COVID, the Carter Center, under the leadership of Jimmy Carter, gave me an opportunity to go and manage the elections in Zambia. And the elections in Zambia at that time were done under COVID structures and COVID mechanisms. So I was in Zambia for about 4 months, managing the election in Zambia on behalf of the Carter Center. As I said, I've been privileged to do 8 elections.
Did you say managing or observing?
As a coordinator of election, you are basically managing that election on behalf of the person who has taken you there, but at the same time you are observing. So you are working very, very closely with the EMB and reporting regularly on the challenges, hiccups, and that you are checking there. So you are basically hosted by the EMB of that country. Around that time, I realized that apart from the 1997 election, I hadn't done much in Kenya in terms of active involvement in election observation and election management. So the Standard Media Group came up with an election consultancy. And I was lucky to be on that team again, focusing mostly the 2017 election, focusing mostly on the technology of election and the voter transmission of the election. That was my focus when I was working at the Standard Media Group. So on a consultancy basis. So I knew exactly where the challenges are. Chair? I have experience at my fingertips when it comes to auditing an entire electoral process. I know what happens on voter registration. Like right now, I know where we're going to have a challenge on voter registration. I know the basics of solving that problem. I remember that our former head of state, who was my head of mission in the Zambia election, now is the president of Ghana. That time he was in the opposition. He told me, make it simple. Election is not complex. Make it simple. If you remember the decision of the Supreme Court on the nullification, if you remember Justice Mwilo was asking
I think it's fair enough for your introduction. You will speak to those other things around elections as we go by.
Most obliged.
Yeah, allow me to ask the Vice Chair to also ask you her question.